Hello and welcome back to Making It Out of the Woods. This is me all wrapped up like a burrito in preparation for my mini adventure. I left Foxy behind, escaped the den and headed off to Orkney. For those of you who don't know already, Orkney is an archipelago made up of around 70 islands which lay off the north coast of Scotland. So this will be my first visit and I've got 3 days to explore the mainland. Oh, and I'm taking you along with me. And I warn you now, don't expect amazing videography. I hadn't initially planned to film anything, but I did think that then some of you may be interested to have a look around with me. I bought a gimbal a few months ago and I haven't had time to test it, so I figured this trip would be a good opportunity. Turns out it's very windy on Orkney and gimbals don't like the wind too much. But I did the best that I could and I think I've got some footage that you might enjoy seeing. So I took the ferry from Kirkwall to St Margaret's Hope on the mainland. Fortunately, no flotation devices were required on this crossing and it took around an hour. The return journey was a little more wild, and if you hang on till the end you'll see exactly what I mean. Orkney has been inhabited for more than 8,000 years, initially by the Mesolithic and Neolithic tribes, the Picts, and then those most famous of Norsemen, the Vikings. The Vikings only settled on Orkney for around 500 years, but they left a massive archaeological footprint. I thought I'd found it straight away, but it turns out this wasn't it. It's just a hole in the ground. Remember this log? I turned it into Sven. Now I can't be sure, but Sven's ancestors may have arrived in Great Britain by way of Orkney, but we'll never truly know. One of the first things you'll notice about Orkney are the standing stones. They seem to be everywhere. This particular sentinel stands beside the causeway between the Harray and Stennis locks. It's believed to originally have been one of a pair. Now that's impressive, but if you spin around whilst you're stood at this megalith, you're going to see the standing stones of Stennis. Now, you're going to have to get used to some dodgy shots here. This is me, trying out the gimbal, being a little bit lost with it. I look a little bit unhinged, but never mind. It's hard to walk, look at the camera, keep the gimbal stabilised in the wind, and watch where you're going. It does improve. So anyway, these are the standing stones of Stennis. The stones here are part of the Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site, a series of important domestic and ritual monuments built at least 5,000 years ago. No one knows for certain, but it's believed that the Stennis stones may form the earliest henge monument in the British Isles. Only 4 of the original stones remain. It's thought that there were initially 12, but the 4 that do remain are absolute giants. The focus of the circle is a large hearth at its centre. This may have had symbolic use to mimic the layout of what would have been a Neolithic house, but really we're not sure. I think people have come up with all sorts of random ideas over the years. Obviously, most of them think it was used for human sacrifice, but we'll never know. I'm not going to hang around too long though, just in case. Let's head on to the next destination. Oh, this was me taking a wrong turn into the Highland Park Whisky Distillery. After reading that sign, I turned around pretty sharpish and found my way to the Magnus Cathedral. So St Magnus's Cathedral, known as the Light in the North, which sounds a bit Game of Thronesy to me, is Britain's most northerly cathedral. It was founded in 1137 by the Viking Earl Rognvald in honour of his uncle St Magnus, who was unfortunately martyred in Orkney. The cathedral now belongs to the people of Orkney and they're happy for you to have a look around, but they're not too pleased if you film in there, so I just took loads of still shots to share with you. I'm not being funny, I wasn't going to push my luck. I've just come back from a sacrificial stone circle. Maybe that's what they do with people who try to film in the cathedral. Off to the best standing stones on the mainland in my opinion. This is the Ring of Brodgar and it is spectacular. This monument originally consisted of 60 stones, but now only 36 remain. There are also around 13 prehistorical burial mounds on the site and a large ditch surrounding the circle. The Scottish geologist Hugh Miller, visiting in 1846, wrote that the stones look like an assemblage of ancient druids, mysteriously stern and invincibly silent. Now you guys know I'm pretty light-hearted, but this place is special. It held an air of mystery, solemnity, and somehow it made the ties we have with those who've come before us tangible. I'm not particularly spiritual, but I found myself inexplicably overwhelmed. This site simply demands reverence. Okay, enough reverence. You're about to see my tassels blowing in the wind. Look away now. I did mention that Orkney was really windy. So standing stones are fab, but do you know what's more fab? Moss. Moss that grows on ancient standing stones. I borrowed a little bit of this Orcadian moss. Don't tell anybody, but you'll see some of this moss in some upcoming projects. Moss wasn't the only thing I took away from some of the sites I've visited in Orkney. There's a wealth of inspiration to be had from the textures in the standing stones, the colours of the sea, skies and heather, and even in some of the World War II structures that I'll show you when we head back down to the coast. But right now I'm taking you for a walk over to one of those 13 prehistoric burial mounds I talked about earlier. Come on, watch your step. I say watch your step because clearly I didn't. But disaster averted, I got back up and walked to the top of the mound because I really wanted to share this view with you guys. Look at this, it's stunning. If you're gonna have to be buried, then maybe the best idea is to have a burial place with a view. Now we're going to Skara Brae. This is a stone-built Neolithic settlement on the Bay of Scale. And just like the sign says, this walk will take you back in time 5,000 years. Engraved stones along the pathway detail a timeline of historical significance. No spoilers, but Skara Brae is older than Stonehenge and even the Great Pyramids of Giza. It's often called the Scottish Pompeii because of its excellent preservation. But before we get to the village, I had to stop off and check out Scale Bay. This is stunning. Now I did intend to present some of this video actually live on scene. You'll see why I didn't.
Welcome back to Making Out and welcome to Orkney.
The wind noise, and it's at this point that the gimbal turns, the tripod blows over, and I gave up. A short walk from the bay and you come across Skara Brae. Now Skara Brae was discovered by chance when a violent storm hit Scotland and the Bay of Scale in 1850. Gillen Knoll, then known as Skara Brae, was essentially stripped of its covering of earth and beneath it lay the ancient village. Now, unlike the standing stones and ceremonial sites in Orkney, Skara Brae gives us a glimpse into everyday Neolithic life and living. This incredible settlement consists of around 10 houses made with flagstones in dams of earth that provided support for the walls. Inside the houses were hearths, stone beds, cupboards, and even a rudimentary sewage system which took effluent out to sea. But the most important discovery? The site has its very own workshop. Imagine that, it's like a Neolithic Maker's Central. The folks responsible for the preservation of the village obviously don't want people jumping in and out of there, so they very kindly reconstructed a house that you can wander around, so come take a look with me. The first thing I noticed was just how quiet it is. You can't hear the sea at all. The second thing I noticed was that there's a foxy tail on one of their boats. Staying foxy, even in Neolithic times. The centre of the home was a hearth, and to each side of the hearth, a couple of stone beds. The stone beds would have been filled with moss and grasses to keep it soft, and there's even some sort of storage cupboard. These dwellings must have been incredibly cosy because you can hear the quietness, and as soon as I step out, there's the wind, you hear the sea and the wind, but nothing under that ground. So that was Skara Brae. Awesome. Now off to Stromness for a spot of lunch. That's a freshly caught Orkney salmon with lemon mayonnaise, hot chocolate and a rhubarb and custard blondie. Very nice indeed. Stromness is a place shaped by the sea, a safe haven in Viking times and once a whaling and herring fishing port. It's a network of flagstone streets, piers, slipways. Oh, and the first daffodils I've seen this year were blooming there, as if they knew a Welsh person like me was coming to visit. I also did overhear a couple of weird conversations in the cafe between a couple of old boys, one swearing that he'd seen a mermaid, 6 foot tall she was, blonde hair all the way down her back, and another one who'd been involved in a historical smuggling organisation. I guess that's island life. From smugglers to church. This is the Orkney Round Kirk. It's Scotland's only surviving circular medieval church, built in the 11th or 12th century and inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. At the time of construction, the Great Crusades were in full swing, and these round churches had become a popular design as returning crusaders tried to replicate the structures of the Holy Land. But they also had another good idea. Beside the church lay the stone remains of what was thought to be a drinking hall. So a few pints, then roll yourself into church, back to the pub, roll yourself into church. You get the picture. Whilst I was here, I said a prayer and hoped that a miracle could happen, the wind would drop and I could use the gimbal. But it didn't. I did film these lovely snowdrops though, which means that springtime's on the way. Now to the Woodford Hill cairn. This was a bit of a trek with fabulous views down across the islands, and I'm sure even more beautiful when the heathers are in their full purple hues. The problem with that though is that when the heathers are in hue, the season for ticks is upon us. Ew. I was happy enough to trample the steep boggy hills in the mud, high winds and rufous brown hues of the heathers without a single tick. The trek to this cairn is really quite remote, and having learnt my lesson falling up the burial mound, I was a little bit more careful because I think if I'd rolled off the side here, no one would have found me. After about half an hour's walk, you finally get to the cairn. It's a chambered cairn and you can get inside it. There's a ladder with a hatch. They even leave a torch for you to have a look around inside. It's a bit spooky, so I didn't hang around too long. It's definitely worth the walk though. What an incredible place. Back down to the coast now to check out some awesome World War II infrastructure. This is me posing awkwardly on one of the Churchill barriers. The barriers form 4 causeways with a total length of around 2 kilometres. They link the Orkney Mainland in the north of the island to South Ronaldsay and 2 smaller islands of Lambholm and Glimpsholm. On October the 14th, 1939, a Royal Navy battleship, the HMS Royal Oak, was sunk at her moorings by the U-47 German U-boat. The U-boat entered Scapa Flow, which was the anchorage for the home fleet, via the Eastern Passage, Home Sound. These eastern passages had previously been protected by scuttled ships sunk to make the passage to Scapa Flow almost impossible. Some of these scuttle ships are still visible to this day. Unfortunately, the U-47 managed to navigate around the block ships at high tide. After this disaster, Churchill, who was then the first Sea Lord, gave orders to construct the barriers. The top section that we now see comprises of 66,000 locally cast concrete blocks. The blocks are arranged in 5 and 10 ton sizings. A construction project of this size required a substantial labour force. Much of this labour force was provided by 1,300 Italian prisoners of war. These soldiers were captured in North Africa and transported to build the barriers from 1942 onwards. The prisoners were housed in 3 camps. Those in Camp 60 were permitted to convert 2 Nissan huts into a chapel. This ornate chapel survives to this day, and that's where I'll take you to next. Even down at the coast I found some amazing textures and colours, real inspirations for some upcoming projects. The last stop on my mini adventure is the Italian chapel. An artist amongst the prisoners of war was given the task of transforming 2 Nissan huts into a chapel. Assisted by other tradesmen, in particular a blacksmith and a cement worker, he produced this stunning place of worship. Now, I don't think the bloke there when I visited was Italian, but he was laying a new concrete path and access to the chapel interior wasn't permitted. It's fair enough. I went out of season, and with 100,000 visitors each year, that pathway definitely needed upkeeping. Unfortunately, obviously I don't have any photographs of the interior, but there's plenty online and it's really worth a look. And that pretty much concludes my mini adventure of Orkney. I will come back in the summer to show you around some of the other islands, especially Hoy. I'll be back in puffin season. This is me wrapped up for the return ferry home. You'll see why. The weird thing is no one else is out on the sun deck. Thanks for watching. Stay foxy and I'll see you in the workshop next week.